Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our Harvard Classics lecture. This is lecture number 81 from the Harvard Classics, volume number 18. Modern English Drama was what it was called in 1909. The use of the word modern has to make us smile. Oliver Goldsmith, She Stoops to Conquer, the great comedy of 1773 is our topic here. Now there are some assumptions that we want to make sure that we always say out loud at the beginning of our Harvard Classics. If you haven't been following our stuff at LearnStrong.net, we very much recommend that you do that. Find the Harvard Classics folder. Maybe you want to pay attention to a few of the lectures before. Always, our learning theory is hypercritical for us, connecting new information to old information in meaningful ways. We're always, of course, learning to do this through our reading annotative approach of asking three guiding questions. What does the text say? Level 1, summary. What does the text mean? Level 2, 2A, themes, messages, 2B, rhetorical. And we like to concentrate with, for example, in this play, symbolism and irony, following with some of our study of other comedies. And obviously this is going to be one of those really interesting comedies for us. Finally, in level 3, how can I relate this information to other texts that I already know about? We'll make some observations at 3A about other texts. And then finally at 3B, how can I relate it to myself? Now, Goldsmith himself called this a laughing comedy as opposed to distinguish it from a sentimental comedy, which was kind of the more popular style of comedies in his day. Samuel Johnson, the great dictionary writer Samuel Johnson, who was a friend of Goldsmith's, actually considered this one of the great comedies of his own day, which is remarkable high praise. Let's do some quick biography, then we'll get to the play itself, summarize the play, and then we'll do some quick levels of 2 and 3. Goldsmith was born the 10th of November in 1728, and he dies April 4th, 1774. And part of his death has something to do with the fact that he didn't live the best life financially, struggled a little bit. He ended up at Trinity College in 1744 in Dublin. He is Irish. He ended up studying medicine and at the University of Edinburgh, was there from 1752 to 1755. But he was always in debt, and so he ended up getting involved with any number of writing projects. And with Samuel Johnson and a number of others, he began the club, as it was referred to. Ultimately, he's buried in Temple Church in London, and yet is considered one of the great writers of the comedy. And She Stoops to Conquer is the text that we'll be working with. Let's go through it quickly now, starting with Act 1. We are in the opening lines at the Hardcastle's home in the countryside. Mama will say about her husband, "You're very particular. Is there a creature in the whole country but ourselves that does not take a trip to town now and then to rub off the rust a little?" And this is responded with the back vanity and affectation to last a whole year. And in many ways, this is what we're actually going to see in this play. Let's follow it. We are, as we said, we're at the Hardcastle's home in the countryside. Mrs. Hardcastle will complain to her husband. They never get to go, as we just read, never get to leave their rural home, go see things happening in the city. And Hardcastle will say, you know, he loves the old versus the new. He even says that he loves his old wife. Mrs. Hardcastle will say that she was a young woman when she had her first husband's son, Tony, and he's not yet 21. Now we're going to find out that Tony actually is 21, but part of the background of the story here is that he's not quite 21. Hardcastle will complain, Tony is pretty immature, and he loves pranks. We're going to have a prank in here. Think of Tony as kind of like Puck in Midsummer Night's Dream, in Shakespeare's great comedy. And then Tony will show up. For a few seconds on stage. He's on his way to go to a pub. His mother will follow him off stage. She's asking him, "Why don't you spend time with us instead of going out and partying?" Hardcastle's daughter Kate then will enter, and this will be the she in the title, She Stoops to Conquer, okay? And he right away will remark on the clothing that she's wearing. So right away you get Hardcastle, Mr. Hardcastle, he's of the old school, and he doesn't really like the fact that she's dressing in the modern style. She will remind him, "Hey, Daddy, we had a deal, right? I wear what I like in the morning, and I dress in the old-fashioned way in the evening, you know, when I'm around you." Hardcastle then will reveal that he has news. His friend, Sir Charles' son, Marlowe, is coming to visit, and Hardcastle hopes that Kate and Marlowe will Mary. Now, we'll immediately think, for example, of Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet in the way in which Lord Capulet and Juliet have that exchange at the end of the play in which he tells her, you must marry. We've got a game getting played here already where we're doing the arranged marriage gig, right? Hardcastle then will say that Marlowe has a reputation. He's handsome, he's intelligent, he's very modest, he's a great stand-up guy. Kate will say that she likes everything that was just said about what she just heard, except for the last part, the whole part about being modest. So you get a sense Kate's a little bit more of the modern girl, if you will. Hardcastle will leave, exit, leaving Kate to kind of think about her visitor, right? She's joined then by her cousin, Constance, whom she tells about Marlowe's soon-to-happen visit. And Constance will tell her that she actually knows Marlowe because he's the best friend of the guy that she likes, Hastings. And so right away this starts to have the feel of a Shakespearean comedy. The odd thing, she says, though, about Marlowe is that he is incredibly shy, especially around upper-class women. And this mention will then take us into this play as a play of class and discussions of class. And therefore, he loves to talk with lower-class women because he feels comfortable around them, but not upper-class women. This is going to be a problem, obviously, for Kate. And that will explain why she has to stoop, that is to say, take on a lower class to conquer, that is to say, to get her guy. Mrs. Hardcastle wants Constance to marry her cousin, Tony, so that Constance inherited jewels will stay in the family, and now these jewels will become a symbol in some way, as you'll see. Constance will tell Kate that she pretends to be willing to marry Tony so that she'll not suspect that she actually loves Hastings. Constance, however, is somewhat fortunate in that Tony doesn't really want to marry Constance any more than Constance wants to marry Tony. We then will change. The scene changes to a bar. This is fun stuff now. Tony's drinking with a group of lower class pals. The bar's owner says the two fashionable looking guys have shown up and they're looking for Mr. Hardcastle's house. Tony immediately understands this has got to be Marlowe, and he decides to play the trick. And this is, of course, common to Shakespearean comedies as well. To trick Marlowe into believing that Hardcastle's house is actually an inn or a hotel. So there's going to be our confusion. We'll put it in your notes. This is always about appearance versus reality, okay? And then Act 2 will begin. We're with Hardcastle, and he's trying to teach his servants how to behave in front of the guests. So, you know, you can kind of already sense this making fun of the whole notion of manners and how you're supposed to behave. And then, of course, Marlowe and Hastings will arrive, believing they're at a hotel or an inn, and of course treating Hardcastle anything but well, because they think Hardcastle is not who Hardcastle is, right? Hardcastle will enter, he tries to engage the guests in conversation. The two young men actually ignore what he says because they think he's just the innkeeper and therefore a lower class. Hardcastle is really shocked by this rude treatment of him, right? He insists, Marlowe insists on being shown to his room, and Hardcastle will in fact take him, and when Hastings is left alone, Constance now will enter in the second act. Hearing quickly, Hastings, as soon as he hears it, that he's in an inn, Constance immediately will point out this has got to be Tony's trick. And Hastings will say, we ought to keep Marlowe in the dark about this because, you know, if he finds out, he's going to be really embarrassed. He's going to leave immediately if he learns the truth. Hastings then will tell Constance, I want to elope with you, but she's a little reluctant because she doesn't want to lose these jewels, this fortune. She'll only inherit it if she marries somebody who her aunt gives permission for. She promises, though, Hastings, I will run away with you as soon as I got the jewels, okay? And Marlowe will return, complaining that Hardcastle won't leave him alone. Hastings tells Marlowe that by coincidence, Constance and Kate are both at this inn as well, so they continue the game that's getting played. By the way, this is will take us back to some of the conversations that we made in an earlier Harvard's Classic lecture about Don Quixote. He also ends up in an inn and also is, of course, going to, a number of times, be somewhat confused about where he is. Now, Marlowe is going to be really, really anxious the moment that Kate enters the room. She tries to talk with Marlowe, and it just doesn't work out. Once Hastings and Constance leave, Kate and Marlowe are all alone. Marlowe, however, is really nervous, and he can't really even complete sentences. He can't even look in her face. He ends the conversation. He runs away. Before exiting, however, the stage for Kate, she will do a little bit of talking out loud to herself, that if he wasn't so shy, she probably would be interested in him as a possible guy. Tony and Constance will come back on stage, followed by Hastings and Mrs. Hardcastle. Constance will make a show of flirting with Tony for the ruse with Mrs. Hardcastle. While he tries to repel her advances, Hastings will chat with Mrs. Hardcastle and point out that Constance and Tony say that they are betrothed. Tony objects to this loudly. Hastings tells Mrs. Hardcastle that he will try to talk some sense into Tony, and Constance and Mrs. Hardcastle will then walk off stage. Hastings will reveal to Tony that he loves Constance and wants to elope with her. Tony then is thrilled, and he promises, anything I can do to help this couple figure it out, I'm very happy to do it, and that's how the second act is. The third act will begin with Hardcastle and Kate comparing their very different views of Marlowe, right? Hardcastle will say he's shocked at how bold Marlowe is. Of course, Marlowe, thinking Hardcastle is not a wealthy man, but just a guy that runs an inn. She, of course, finds him incredibly shy, demure, that kind of thing. Kate will say to her father, look, you should give Marlowe a chance, right? Let's find out what his real true character is. Tony will present Hastings with a box then all of a sudden containing Constance's jewels, which he stole from his mother's drawers. Constance and Mrs. Hardcastle will enter, Hastings will exit. Constance then will try to convince her aunt to let her try on her jewels, but Mrs. Hardcastle will not let it happen. Tony suggests that Mrs. Hardcastle tell Constance that in fact the jewels are missing, which she does, and of course Constance is then pretty upset. Tony will then tell Constance privately, don't worry about it, the jewels are fine, they're with Hastings, and he's preparing for your elopement. Meanwhile, Mrs. Hastings has actually found out that the jewels are in fact missing, right? Tony will tease his mom, who's obviously worked up, and then the two of them exit. Kate will enter now with her maid, Pimple, and she'll be dressed in old-fashioned clothes that her father prefers. She has learned about Tony's prank. She laughs at Marlowe's belief that he's in an inn. Pimple says that Marlowe mistook Kate for the inn's barmaid. Okay, Kate says she wants to take advantage of the mistake, which will allow her to talk to Marlowe without, all this shyness type of thing. Pimple exits. Marlowe comes in. Kate pretends to be a maid of the lower class. She speaks to Marlowe in accent of the lower class, and here right away we can think about the famous Pygmalion play, where language defines in some way your class and who you are. The moment that this happens, Marlowe immediately will recognize her, Kate is beautiful. He starts flirting with her. He even tries to kiss her. And all of a sudden, Daddy shows up and walks in the room and sees them. Marlowe runs off. Hardcastle will tell his daughter he's determined to get rid of Marlowe out of the house. And one more time, Kate, at the end of the third act, will tell her dad, just bear with me here. This is the She Stoops to Conquer part of the play, right? Bear with me here. I know that Marlowe isn't the bad guy you think him to be. Act 4 will begin with Constance and Hastings planning their getaway, their elopement, right? Constance will tell Hastings she has heard that Sir Charles will soon be arriving, and Hastings tells Constance he has entrusted her box of jewels to Marlowe to keep them safe, and then they both will leave. Marlowe will enter, congratulating himself on thinking that he gave the box of jewels to the landlady, which is really Mrs. Hardcastle, to keep it safe. Hastings enters. Marlowe tells him that he's given the jewels away to the landlady, and now they're secure. Hastings, of course, is upset, but he won't let Mrs. Hardcastle or Marlowe know that that Mrs. Hardcastle now has the jewels, and now we got a problem with our solution, right? Think about Midsummer Night's Dream and running away to the woods, and the problem that Puck provides is similar, right, kind of thing. Hardcastle enters. He begins to have an argument with Marlowe. The servants have gotten drunk, storming away. Hardcastle will say that he would have never predicted that Marlowe was so rude because he is the son of Sir Charles, right? Marlowe is confused, right, by this remark. And then at that moment, right about the moment he's about to figure it out, in comes Kate. Marlowe begins to understand that something isn't right. Asks Kate where they are, and she tells them that they're actually at, well, you're actually at Mr. Hardcastle's house. And immediately Marlowe is just kind of, blown away, horrified, we might say, at the error. Kate does not yet reveal her true identity. She continues to pretend as if she's a poor relation of the family, and Marlowe will immediately say, I'm gone, I'm out of here, and Kate will weep at the news, and he's kind of blown away by this, and he's like, oh, she actually likes me. Tony and Constance, meanwhile, will discuss their plan to elope with Hastings, even without the jewels. Let's forget about the jewels. Mrs. Hardcastle will enter, and the two cousins pretend to flirt so she won't in any way suspect the possible elopement. And then a letter comes from Hastings addressed to Tony. But this is the one more thing that makes this a fun comedy. Tony can't read for whatever reason. His mother has to read it to him. And the letter then reveals the plan, right? The elopement plans. Mrs. Hardcastle, of course, flies off. She's upset. She tells Constance that, fine, I'm sending you away to your Aunt Pettigrew's house. And Hastings will enter and yell at Tony for giving away the secret, as you can imagine, right? Marlowe will enter, and he yells at both Tony and Hastings about deceiving him. So in other words, we're coming now to the end of the fourth act, the beginning of the fifth act, and everybody's upset at everybody for the whole notion of fooling, right? Constance is the one that's pretty worked up, right? She begs Hastings, just don't leave me, stay true to me, and even if we have to wait for several years so I can get the jewels and then we can marry. Constance leaves. Tony tells Hastings to meet him in the garden in 2 hours. I got a way to figure all this out. And the opening of the fifth act then will lead us to wonder how in heaven's name is all this going to work out. Hardcastle is at the beginning of the fifth act. Hardcastle is now with just recently arrived Sir Charles. And they both laugh over Marlowe's mistaking the house for an inn. Seems to suggest Marlowe's kind of a little bit dingy, a little bit dumb, maybe a little bit naive, we might say. Hardcastle will say that he saw Marlowe take Kate's hand, and he thinks that actually they might marry. And Marlowe then will enter, and he will formally apologize, as one would in this time culture, a play of manners to Hardcastle. And Hardcastle will say right away, it's fine, you didn't know who I was, and will forgive him for it. Since Marlowe and Kate will soon marry, right? And Marlowe will deny that he has any interest in Kate whatsoever. Hardcastle, however, will refuse to believe him, and that makes Marlowe mad, so he runs off stage. Kate then comes in. She assures the two fathers that, in fact, Marlowe does like her. It's just he doesn't know that he likes her, right? She tells the two fathers, why don't you hide behind a screen so you can see the game we're playing here? This is very much like in Shakespeare's plays. We have the same thing, that being able to kind of watch without somebody knowing. And in half an hour, she says, I'm going to show you how much Marlowe really does love me. Meanwhile, we're out in the garden. Tony will get there. He tells Hastings that he's driven his mother and Constance in a circle, right, taking them to Aunt Pettigrew's house. Mrs. Hardcastle was really, really worried, upset, because she thought that they had gotten lost in a dangerous place. Hastings will rush off to find Constance. Another place in the garden, Hastings will try to convince Constance to elope with him. She says she's too tired from all the crazy stress of the night to run away. Instead, she wants to explain their situation to Hardcastle and hope that he can maybe play a role in influencing his wife to allow them to marry. Meanwhile, inside the house, and of course this works just like great opera, right? So you got all these different scenes happening simultaneously. Hardcastle and Sir Charles hide behind a screen and they watch the exchange between Marlowe and Kate. Kate no longer now will pretend to be a barmaid. She's going to speak in her normal voice, and this just kind of blows Marlowe away. He wishes, he says, that he could stay with her, but he doesn't want to disappoint his family by marrying somebody of low birth, that is to say, Stoops to conquer, right? Kate will then say, yeah, here's the deal. I have an upper class background. I'm in fact the woman that you actually came to see. And immediately Marlowe will kneel before the two fathers will come out from behind the screen, asking why he lied to them about, about his feelings for Kate. Marlowe will learn Kate's true identity and is again embarrassed at having been deceived. So, we obviously can see where this is trending. Mrs. Hardcastle and Tony then will show up. Mrs. Hardcastle obviously realizing where she is. She will say that Constance and Hastings have run off together, but she is in fact happy about the fact that she at least gets to keep the jewels. And it's at that moment that Hastings and Constance will come back on stage. Sir Charles immediately recognizes Hastings. He tells Hardcastle, no, this is a good kid. This is a good man here. And Hardcastle asks Tony if he's really wanting to marry his cousin. Then Tony will say, no, I'm pretty sure I don't want to marry my cousin, and since he can't, but he says, I can't formally refuse because I'm not 21 years old, right? I got to wait until I'm 21. Hardcastle will then reveal this will be the last of the, I thought appearance was reality. Hardcastle will then reveal that Mrs. Hardcastle has in fact been hiding the fact that Tony is in fact 21. Allowing Tony obviously to say that he doesn't want to marry Constance, obviously allowing Constance to be married to Hastings, and obviously keep her fortune as well. Everyone except for Miss Hardcastle is in fact pretty happy about this situation with the two young couples, and at the very end we have the sense that they're all going to marry and everything is going to be, very happy. Just like Shakespearean comedies, you end comedies with marriages to show that harmony, to move from chaos to order, as we have said about our Shakespeare study. Let's jump now quickly to levels 2 and 3. At 2A, messages. Well, one obvious message here is epistemologically, things are not always what they appear or what they seem, right? And therefore, a good dose of humility is probably not a bad thing. As well, we've got that message about you should treat others as fair, even if they are beneath you in terms of social class. And then finally, think about the dynamics between youth and old age and the ways in which that works. That's an interesting one as well. Kate wants to be modern. Dad's not interested in modernity. And yet through the play, Kate finds a way to be able to kind of manipulate the system almost against itself to get what she wants. It's quite lovely. At 2B, well, here, of course, think about, as we said it, the tension between appearance and reality. That is to say, what is it that we really know and what is it that we think we know? Note the irony of the stooping so that one can conquer. Notice the symbolism of the dress and the speech to show class distinctions and the ways in which those class distinctions, in the end,